All right, well, good morning and thank you for joining us for our roofing town hall. We are going to have a conversation with three of our panelists, but before we introduce them, let me introduce Benchmark. We are a roof and pavement consulting company headquartered in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and we have a satellite office in Waukesha, Wisconsin. We have 115 employees, with many of our consultants located across the United States, much like Jennifer. Our goal is to provide customers with sound and valuable counsel, and that is our goal today. We do have a LinkedIn page that we encourage you to give a follow. I included a QR code on this slide. If you have an iPhone or Android, you should be able to turn on your camera app, hold it up to that code, and that will load our profiles. One quick note, we did have a last-minute change in panelists. Chad Kaminsky was unavailable due to a family emergency, and so Jennifer Stephan was kind enough to join in. Mike Newland is a senior consultant with Benchmark, and he works with numerous clients in the healthcare, food production, and product distribution industries. Andrew Reynolds is a senior consultant and partner with Benchmark and is a professional engineer. Andrew focuses on manufacturing and education clients located across the United States. Give you a second. Andrew does also have a LinkedIn page where he shares a lot of great content. And up next is Jennifer Stephan. Jennifer is a senior consultant and registered roof consultant. She works with manufacturing, food service, and healthcare clients. She is based out of the Southeast United States, but she does travel across the country. Once again, she also has a great LinkedIn page, so feel free to give her a connection. And finally, I am Ben Fiedler. I am the presenter and moderator for this town hall today. If you have any questions, feel free to submit them. They will be use the question and answer section of Zoom, and they will come directly to me, and I can get them to the panel. Our questions today are submitted by you, our viewers, as well as questions that we have heard from numerous clients throughout the United States as we work with them. We appreciate your time in submitting these questions. If you can think of any questions right now that you would like to ask the panel, feel free to ask them through the question and answer section at the bottom of your screen. And with that, we will begin with the town hall. So the first question I'm going to ask to you, Andrew. How do you assess the condition of a ballasted roof, whether it's EPDM, TPO, or a gravel surfaced built-up roof?
Sure. So really good question. My first reaction is just to say you have to do it very carefully, because I think a lot of people just kind of breeze over it because you can't see anything on the field membrane, which isn't necessarily true. It takes a little physical labor, but if you're on like a ballasted EPDM, you want to kick the gravel away and look at a few seams at least to see their integrity, whether they're glued or whether they're seam tape, doesn't really matter. You want to check on those. Besides that, flashing conditions are a huge tell. Ballasted EPDM, there's not a ton of new ballasted roofs going on, so a lot of them that are out there are aging right now. So a lot of those flashings will be tending to pull in as they age, so that'll give you a good indicator on kind of life expectancy and so forth. And another, the biggest one is taking core samples. That's especially on a built-up roof that has gravel on it. If you take a core sample and all the plies just kind of come out like playing cards, obviously it's aged and it's not in great condition. So there's a lot of things you can do. It's difficult. It's not as easy as an adhered system or mechanically attached. But there's no reason not to take your time on it when looking at those. So.
Yeah, I might add, Andrew, one of the things about ballasted roofs that we typically see is most of the deficiencies are with the exposed components. The perimeter flashing, curb flashings, and so on. That's the lion's share of the issues are with those components.
Yep, I agree.
All righty. And Mike, the next question is for you. How often should you inspect your roof assets?
Yeah, again, great question. It's kind of a $64,000 question, but you know, technically, there's no right answer here. But you know, things can vary with the inspection process due to the age of the roof system, due to your geography, the climate that that roof is exposed to has impacts on it. You know, if you're in a hail zone or if you're in a high wind zone, coastal areas, you should be inspecting your roof, particularly in coastal areas prior to a storm and then directly after, for example. Additionally, if you've got newer roofs, we get asked about this all the time. Why should I inspect my new roof? Well, you've got a 2-year contractor warranty most often, folks. So we need to keep in mind that we can engage that contractor, the installing contractor, if we observe issues with that new roof within those first 2 years. So that gives you an opportunity for nothing to have repairs made or deficiencies taken care of in that time frame. So there's no right or wrong answer. It could be 1 year, it could be 3 years, it could be 5 years. It really depends on that fleet of roofs that you own on the frequency.
So Mike, a follow-up question, and somebody else might also feel free to answer. If you have a roof that is brand new, how often should you inspect that roof?
Well, and again, I think that regardless of age, particularly within the first 2 years, that brand new roof is under a 2-year contractor warranty. So I would recommend that you take advantage of that. Typically, we're going to see issues arise within the first 2 to 3 years, and it's mainly due to labor or installation. So let's take advantage of that warranty that our building owners are paying for and have that roofing contractor be responsible for any deficiencies.
Perfect. So Jennifer, Andrew touched on this a little bit with core samples on the ballasted and built up roof systems. Why is it so important to take core samples while you're conducting a survey?
Well, depending on whether it's an initial survey for looking at a condition assessment or whether it's a survey for design, you want to find out what's going on underneath the surface. So there's usually a lot more going on that we can't see below the membrane. So we'll take a core sample to confirm the components. We'll take a core sample to look at the deck condition, to look if there's trapped moisture, to find out if there's 1 or 2 roofs, if that roof is being considered for a recover, or whether it's got to come off all of it down to the deck. There's a lot of things that can be concealed below the roof membrane, and it's important to find out what's going on so that you can properly diagnose that roof, determine its service life, and determine what's needed for replacement.
You know, and I'm going to add a little bit to that. One of the things that I think is also very important with that is just retaining that information, because as the years go by and as members responsible for managing the roofing portfolio, you want to make sure that information can be carried forward. And so having a good database that has your core samples and warranty information can be really important. And so one thing Jennifer mentioned was infrared or detecting moisture. And so Mike, when do you recommend infrared scans be completed?
And that, again, a really good question that we get quite often. We're often challenged with that diagnostic testing capability that as a consultant we have. And it's one of the tools in our tool bag to be able to assist with determining what condition that roof system is in. So typically, we would recommend scans when we know or numerous leaks have been reported by the building owner. Prior to us getting on site, we would have a list of questions for that building owner and say, all right, have you had leaks? Have you had issues? And if they say yes to that, then typically we would bring the IR camera with us and be prepared for that survey. What the IR camera, of course, does is it detects heat loss. So moisture builds within that roofing system due to leaks or whatever, and that heat then is detected by the IR camera. So we typically do the surveys at night, and it again assists us with identifying those wet components. Once you identify those wet components, the next morning, typically we come back, do core samples per Jennifer's earlier statement to get an idea of, okay, yeah, we're confirming it's wet, and put that information forward with regard to what we recommend. Can you do spot replacement? Can you, or do you get to a point people ask, okay, so what's the fine line between spot replacement of what areas due to the IR or doing a full replacement? And typically the rule of thumb is 30% or more wet, you're better off replacing the entire area.
And also certain components, like there could be certain components that if they've gotten wet, they'll never dry, they'll never return to a structural state that they can be built upon. So that 30% rule is just that, a rule of thumb, because sometimes if you've got a wood fiber board that's saturated below the roof assembly, you may not be able to salvage even the fringes of that area of wet. You may end up taking off far more than you anticipated.
Very good point. Very good point. I'd also like to qualify too that there are certain roof systems out there, folks, that you can't scan. For example, we talked about ballasted EPDM. Andrew talked about that system in the first question. You know, there are particular systems that you can't scan. Those that have heavy ballast on top are very difficult, if not impossible, to scan. So we have to keep in mind the type of roof system and that underlying component. To Jennifer's point, you know, we have trouble sometimes with, for example, white membranes and polyisocyanurate insulation over a steel deck, doing a scan on that because we get false readings. So there's a lot of variables that go into when a scan is appropriate or not.
So Andrew, if you do have a ballasted or a type of assembly that can't receive an infrared scan, what other types of moisture detection systems are there?
So obviously, if you can't get good readings with the camera, which Mike alluded to on a couple of systems, especially ballasted EPDM's tough. You can scan ballasted built-up roofs. It just depends on how. I mean, sometimes you got a heavy layer of gravel, and that just soaks up all that heat during the day, so you're not going to see any results. Another option is Tramexing. We do that a lot with white membranes, whether it's TPO, PVC. I mean, you get good results. It takes a little longer. You're pretty much going around with this pretty simple machine and doing a grid pattern across the roof to see where you hit wet. Another option is nuclear scans. We don't do those personally, but we have some companies we work with that can come on site, and they pretty much have their set of equipment, and they run across the roof, kind of in the same grid pattern thing, but then you get results from them. Works really well. But like Mike said, the tougher ones we see, ballasted EPDM, white membranes, just because there's some reflectance issues. But yeah, those are your options.
So I actually had an experience with a project where there was a tapered insulation system, and so our insulation depths were pretty extreme, and the moisture was actually from the interior of the building. And so to detect that, Tramex with the capacitance meter couldn't get the depth. Infrared sees generally the top layer. And so we used nuclear scans to determine where the wet insulation was that was on the bottom of the roof assembly.
And much like with an infrared, with a nuclear scan, you want to go back and do those core cuts to confirm the findings, because it's giving you a picture of what could be under there. There's also chances that the nuclear scan come back with positive readings where there's no moisture, but it's a bit more fine-tuned than an infrared.
I was just going to say that, Jennifer, and I'd like the audience to keep in mind that core sampling, when we do moisture testing, the subsequent core samples, the destructive testing, that's almost mandatory. We've got to confirm what we see, folks, and that people say, well, why are you cutting a hole in my good roof? Well, listen, we need to see that, in fact, the IR scan, the nuclear scan, the Tramex was accurate.
So when you identify the wet insulation, Jennifer, you kind of alluded to it earlier with your other answers, but why is it really important to get that wet out of the system? What are some of the impacts that you can have with wet?
The wet insulation is no longer doing what it was designed to do. So if you have an area of wet insulation, it's no longer going to offer the same thermal resistance that it was manufactured to provide. It's no longer going to be structural. It can no longer be structurally sound. It could create ponding, create divots in your roof system that sink, that no longer support the membrane, leading to breaches in the membrane. So there's all sorts of reasons to get that wet out, not to mention the fact that you can't bury a wet area beneath a new roof membrane and expect that new roof membrane to perform. That wet area becomes a cancer that just continues to spread, and it can create damage in your new roof membrane if you're talking about stacking on top. So the wet insulation just doesn't, it has to come out. It can't stay in place and have any expectation of performance.
Very good. And so, Mike, what's the benefit of having a detailed roof plan?
You know, there are several. Again, great question. I just addressed this last week with a client that it was more of a, if you will, a compliment that the roof plan is so detailed that it really is a blueprint or a working drawing of what your roofing environment looks like. You know, when you physically locate all the curbs, penetrations, drainage devices, you really get an overview on a sheet of paper and on your desktop of exactly what that roof environment looks like. Be it a complex environment at a food manufacturing plant where you've got piping and curbs and equipment everywhere versus a wide open warehouse that may be a little less complex. What that allows you to do is make a determination of the environment with which, if you're going to be doing repairs or replacements, you've got that blueprint of exactly what's happening on your roof. Further, most roof plans, you could locate photos. So if you've got deficiencies on perimeter flashings or curb flashings, you can get very specific with your photo locations and point those areas out. Taking it one step further, we've developed the roof plan to include action codes. And those action codes physically locate deficiencies on the roof. And that roof plan then becomes a blueprint or repair spec, if you will, for the end user. We identify the deficiency, locate it. There's language on the roof plan that describes what that deficiency is. And it can be, you can utilize that document to receive bids from contractors. So there's a number of uses of having a good detailed roof plan.
Perfect. And we just had a question come in that I think fits in well here. With the current COVID challenges nationwide, with challenges in access to buildings, properties, and possible delays in funds for roofing repair and replacements, what would Benchmark suggest as priorities to facility managers right now? What can they do to help their roofs perform longer?
I can comment on this one a little bit.
Go ahead.
I think probably the most important thing to do is focus in on repairs as much as you can, especially if you have a fleet of replacements that need to be done and you're thinking about possibly recovering those roofs. You have to do repairs, you have to fix leaks, because if you don't do that, you're possibly allowing moisture to come into your roof system, and then maybe it's not viable for recover anymore, and all of a sudden maybe you're more than doubling what your initial replacement cost was. So I think personally, Mike, you might be able to comment on this a little bit more, but I think repairs is definitely one thing that just about everyone should be focusing on right now.
Yeah,
I agree.
would
And
agree.
then protecting that asset so that you don't end up with more deck replacement, or even if you're postponing a roof replacement project and trying to get a couple more years, get up there, try to prevent as much water intrusion as you can, even to the point of putting some temporary coatings on or some temporary repairs or patch areas to try to salvage what you can and get it to last that extra couple years that you're asking for.
I agree again wholeheartedly, guys. We use the term Band-Aid very often, but that Band-Aid can come in a number of forms. And quite frankly, I think the repair refurbishment process is something that's overlooked in our industry. Regardless of the time frame, the economic environment right now obviously is challenging. So it's critical that the repairs and preventative maintenance and that activity is taken care of now, so that we can you can defer capital, defer that expense, and very important. One tool, by the way, also in this COVID environment, by the way, is that there are several if you will, aerial photography aerial imagery tools out there, Google Earth, pictometry, and so on, that you can prepare roof plans and you can actually zero in on your roof and find areas of problems. We've got drone technology now that can overfly roofs that you don't physically have to be there. The drone operator is out in the parking lot, so he's not in your facility. There are a number of tools available in this environment that are really quite helpful.
And so as a follow-up to that, and this is kind of $1 million question, how long will your roof last? And that's obviously going to be tied to repairs. So Jennifer, what are your thoughts on how long will a roof last?
That's a loaded question. The roofs, many different roof systems are designed to last different lengths of time, anywhere from 10 to 35 years, depends on what type of system you put in. A lot goes into installation, the quality of the installation, the care that's taken when it's first installed, and then as Mike pointed out, those problems that can occur in those first couple years. So that first set of annual inspections, that first set of care and maintenance sets the stage for that roof to provide that expected performance life. The length of time that your roof will stay on the building is dependent on the care that you give it. If you abuse it and neglect it, you can take some years off of that service life. If you take good care of it, you may be able to extend and add some years to that service life. So it is completely dependent on quality of installation when it first goes down, the components that you put down, the thickness of the membrane, the layers that are installed, and then how well do you take care of it.
Very good. So this next question comes from Bob, and he asked that his company is headquartered in the Northeast, but they have facilities in the South and around the world. What are your experiences and recommendations on purchasing roofing for the added value of insulation and reflectance? And Andrew, I'll let you take this one first.
Sure. So it's a really good question. Purchasing roofs, so I'll start with insulation, because to meet building code, you have to meet certain insulation requirements. There are some variances in there if you have an unconditioned space like a warehouse where you might not have to meet the full R value. So, in the Northeast, for probably like the 2015 building code, you're looking for an R of like 35-ish probably, which is a lot of insulation. And that's by far your biggest cost on that job, except for maybe labor. That's way more expensive than your membrane, adhesives, whatever. But it's also a requirement. So the good thing about insulation for building codes, it's flattening out. They haven't increased requirements since the 2015 building code. There's definitely some good reasons to have that R value on your building, but in my experience, air infiltration, and that's kind of where they're leaning towards now, is where you're going to actually see your energy savings more or less. And on reflection, there's kind of the whole theory, kind of the Mason-Dixon line. The farther you go north, the less you get out of a reflective roof. And there's really no arguing with that. There's been study upon study. You put a white roof in the south where you have more cooling days than heating days for your building, you're going to see those savings way more often than, say, if you're in Minnesota and you put a white roof on. Most of the time, they're cooling their building for a few months out of the year and that's it. Also, if you're in the north and you put a white roof on, a lot of people don't think of this. Your snow melt it takes way longer for snow and ice to get off your roof rather than having like an EPDM roof or even a ballasted roof on. So there's a lot of things. It depends. I'm always all for getting as much insulation as you can. Like I said, there are building code requirements for that. There's also some building code requirements for the use of white membranes, or reflective, not white, but reflective membranes. So there's a lot going on there. That's a tough one. It's really building dependent.
And the caveat to the white roofs north of the Mason-Dixon line is there are municipalities like Chicago that do require it to mitigate heat island effects, which then it is beneficial to have it up there.
Sure.
Right. I think you got to keep in mind too, folks, that your design needs to be site specific. There's not one roof system that fits all. And
even more, it needs to be roof specific, because even on the same site, you can have some that are freezer
Yes.
occupation and some that's manufacturing, some maybe there's a pizza oven below a certain roof section. And that completely changes your insulation requirements, your vapor barrier, the placement of those components. It's not only site. It's actually, I think, roof section specific.
Very good point. I agree wholeheartedly.
So Andrew, how do you correct for improper drainage on a roof?
It's a good question, especially for existing buildings, because current building codes require a 1/4 inch per foot slope, whether that's in your structure or within tapered insulation, which is usually for an existing building, that's usually the route you're going. If you have a dead level roof that ponds and you don't want it to pond anymore, you're probably putting tapered insulation of some sort, whether it's tapered polyisocyanurate or you're putting down EPS and lightweight concrete. Those are your two big ones, super common, really effective. If you do have an existing building, you're not required, if you're doing a replacement, you're not required to hit that 1/4 inch per foot slope. And the newer, I think since 2015 and on, or maybe 2010 and beyond. But we always, I mean, we're big advocates of getting water off roofs. So tapered insulation, adding drains, adding scuppers, that's the route you're going.
Jennifer, so I could tell you were very passionate about roof-specific design. So I'm going to give you this next question, and so you can expand on a little more. Why is roof design important?
Oh, well, that does hit back to that site-specific requirement and the section-specific requirement. I think roof design is about risk management. And at that, I mean, evaluating an individual roof section to determine what it needs, what are its qualifications, what are its performance requirements, what's the wind loading, what's the interior condition that it's trying to protect, what kind of heat load are we looking at, what kind of snow load are we looking at. So all of those factors go into a good roof design. And you have to look at that on an individual roof basis, because across a manufacturing plant, you can have different conditions on the same site. Same manufacturing plant can have a number of different types of roofs that would be appropriate. So I think it's really important that a roof design be completed, for one, so that you can then look at those risks, manage those risks, and develop a plan of action for how you're going to address it, make your roof code compliant, make it meet the wind uplift requirements that it needs to meet for code, and also for insurance requirements like FM Global or GRC. So you take all of that into account when you do this roof design.
And Mike, why is it important that whoever does that design is independent from a contractor or a material manufacturer?
We get this quite often. And I just witnessed this last week at a project, new construction, but it was a generic design, generic details supplied by the manufacturer. And, of course, the roofing contractor then takes that information and can liberally price his or her work. And that's part of the disconnect with that scenario. That if you rely on a contractor or a manufacturer of roofing materials to do your design, you're typically not going to get an apples to apples bid. And typically your prices can be all over the board. So, when you take that out of the equation, when you put the independent perspective in, factor that in, where you don't have a guy that's supplying your material, you don't have a company that's putting your roof on, you have that independent design. It can be more detailed, it can be more apples to apples, which ultimately reduces the cost.
Very good. And Jennifer, when you're getting to the point of needing a new roof, how do you determine whether you should go the route of recover or replacement?
Oh, good question. I know a lot of people may advocate for total recovers everywhere, and some people may advocate for no recovers. It's a bad idea. I think recovers have their place in the roofing world. There are certain advantages to a roof recover if you have taken good care of your original roof system and it's still in functioning shape, doesn't have a lot of moisture uptake. There is possibilities of reusing some insulation layers, of capturing some cost savings by not having that tear off and not having to replace that insulation. There's also the benefit of maybe maybe you have some interior protection concerns. Maybe you have some interior issues that you can't take that roof off safely. And so recover is your best option. I think that in the evaluation of your roof in that survey where you're taking your core samples and you're finding out, do I have one roof, two roofs? What's the condition of this existing roof? Everybody should look at whether a recover is an option, because it can be a cost savings. There are opportunities for benefit with that. There's also some risks, definitely some risks. If you recover a system that's bad, you're just covering up bad, and it's going to have a premature service failure of that new roof membrane. So you're not going to get the 15 years that you expect out of that recover if you've put it on top of something that's failed.
Very good. And so this next question, Mike, kind of goes back to the COVID question. How do you ensure that your roof consultant, your material supplier, and your contractor are financially viable when we're seeing a lot of the contractors out there having trouble keeping busy?
Yeah, it's kind of a loaded question. However, just in the last few weeks, Ben, as you just suggested, I've seen pricing all over the board. We've done a lot of design bid work here lately, and we've had contractors with extraordinary low bids, basically hunting for work, buying work. The downside of that is the potential for that contractor then on the change order side. He's got to make up his margin somewhere. So if you get inordinately low bids, that ought to raise a red flag. There ought to be an opportunity to go back and question that contractor during your bidding process to make sure that they didn't miss something, to make sure that they understood the specification and the design requirements. And further, folks, you can still, this is kind of dark age stuff, but you can still run a D&B on these companies. And the D&B reporting is still very accurate, guys, and can give you an idea of the financial solvency of a membrane manufacturer, of in particular roofing contractors and or consultants. So, I think it's critical that part of your bidding process is a review. Even if you high bid, same thing. Why is it high? You've got to have that opportunity to have that dialogue with the contractor and the manufacturer if necessary in those circumstances.
So this next question kind of goes into the quality assurance construction observation realm. And so for a full tear-off replacement of an adhered membrane roof, at what key steps in the construction process should quality assurance inspections be made? And so I think there's a good discussion here of the difference between part-time and full-time observation and the merits of each.
Mm-hmm. I'll comment a little bit on that. I think for any tear-off, whether it's a consultant on site or somebody at the facility, they should be taking a look at that deck, regardless if it's steel, concrete, channel slabs, whatever it may be, just to make sure it's a sound substrate for that new roof system to go back on, because a lot of times you don't know until you tear off. I mean, you can look at that deck from the underside all day, but a lot of times you're not going to be able to tell. But besides, I mean, if you're looking at like shorter, like part-time stuff like that, if there's a vapor barrier going on, you're going to want that vapor barrier inspected before you start laying up your insulation and membrane system. So there's some key points in there that you want to hit, but if you're doing a full tear-off, I really recommend that somebody outside of that installing contractor get their eyes, because if it's not seen by you, if it's not seen by a consultant, it's not seen by a manufacturer, it's likely this is going to get laid right over. So
also the drain components, like the drain bowls, those types of things, you want to make sure that they're sound and that they don't need to be replaced or don't need to be changed out. The components are still viable for that next 20-year cycle, essentially, because once you bury it again, it's going to become a huge problem if it's not viable.
And so I'd like to, Andrew, you bring up the adhered issue. Bring up a circumstance that on the part-time scenario, I'll call it, where let's say that you've got a facility person or your employer or outside consulting firm managing several different projects. at the same time. And that's basically part-time because you're not doing full-time construction management on that one project. So we had an adhered roof system, and we weren't on site for a day or two because of looking at other projects in this particular location. Came back and was doing an adhered test, basically a pull test using a probe and so on to see how well the membrane was adhered and adhesive. And we could literally pull that membrane off the roof. It was not well adhered, and we learned that the adhesive application was lacking. So when you're building the roof as you go, folks, and any one component that's missed or that's not installed properly affects the entire integrity of that roofing system. And if you don't have eyes on it, you just can't be assured, unfortunately, that you're getting that roof that you're paying for.
And even with the best design that we can do, you know, we've covered all of our bases, we've detailed every little detail that we can possibly see. There's going to be things that come up as questions, and those questions, if we can get an answer on site from a full-time observer or from a person who's there more often than just once a week or once a month, if you can get that answered on site quickly, you can keep the process rolling through and you'll get a good product at the end. If you have to stop the process in order to answer a question or fix a detail or change something because something was found that was unforeseen, it can lead to schedule changes, it can lead to contract cost changes. There's a lot of hiccups that can happen, especially in that first month of a project as it gets rolling and everybody gets their feet underneath them.
I think, Jennifer, one of the big factors you just alluded to is that cost impact and how negative that can be from a change order standpoint, even interpretation of the drawings, if there are drawings and specifications, that need to be done on the spot. You know, you hate to see this, but a contractor will take a little latitude when they can. And so to avoid that, you've got to be able to answer questions very quickly and avoid those cost overruns. I think that that effort in and of itself pays for construction management.
Yeah, it can.
So, Mike, how do you evaluate and select a roofing contractor for repairs at your site?
You know, and that I love this question because, quite frankly, Ben, repairs are an art. They are an absolute art versus a roof replacement. If you can find a good contractor that does repairs and does them well and does them cost effectively, hang on to them, hold them like your sibling, because it's a rare commodity these days in the roofing industry. I'm not going to get into the entire roofing industry, folks, but we've got labor issues on the contractor side. And when you could get a technician that knows how to repair a single ply, a modified, whatever that system is, you need to hang on to them. So what I recommend to building owners is, we're kind of roofing junkies here at Benchmark. If they've got repair projects and they need a good repair contractor, give us a call. We've got a database that's full of guys. We got the good, the bad, and the ugly. And you know, be able to provide them with the track record and the history of those contractors. Many contractors, the bigger ones, have specific repair crews. They've got a side of their business totally dedicated to repairs versus the replacement side. Those are the guys you want because you've got that education of that technician for the repairs, and that is a critical piece of it. I don't want to discount the ma and pa side. Either smaller contractors can be very diligent at that repair because it's typically pretty good money.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. A smaller contractor may have those two components combined with one workforce, but oftentimes the guys that are doing your big scale replacements are not the guys that you want doing your repair scopes, and the guys that are doing your repair scopes are not the guys you want doing your full scale replacements.
I agree.
As I said, there are some exceptions, but usually that crew is a different crew.
And if I misstated that, Jennifer, you're exactly right. I mean, those bigger contractors that have separated crews is what I was referring to. That's exactly right. I think that's a key piece of that.
So, Jennifer, this next question, it looks like this person is from Michigan, and they're considering using spray foam and coatings for their roof system in Michigan. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, well, spray foam. I think there's a time and a place for every roof system. I don't want to discount any roof systems because they all have their perfect scenarios and their places where they're appropriate. Spray foam is kind of temperamental. It, I think, performs best in drier, warmer climates. And once it's installed properly, it can have a good surface record and a good track record. But it takes a skilled applicator to get it down properly, to get the materials to mix properly, and for it to have good adhesion. And that is a dying art, I think. There's not very many really skilled spray foam applicators anymore. In Michigan, would I choose that as the first roof? I don't know. I think that it would have a difficult time giving good performance in Michigan with its cold and snowy times of year.
Oh, looks like we're losing you a little bit there, Jennifer. Might be having a little bit of a connection issue. So we'll just go ahead and move on from there. Andrew.
My video appears to be.
Oh, yep, you're still breaking up a little bit. Andrew, how have the new hail maps impacted roof design?
So hail maps, that regards specifically to FM Global. There's not technically like a hail requirement in the building code, but over the last 3 years or so, FM Global came out with a new hail requirement. It used to be no matter where you were at in the United States, you were either a moderate hail or severe hail region, but it really wasn't that hard to meet those requirements for manufacturers doing tested roof assemblies. Not too long ago, FM revised those maps to come out with a very severe hail region, which covers more of the United States than you probably think. It's probably about a fifth to a quarter, and it runs from Texas all the way up to North Dakota, encompassing a large area of the Midwest. Now, the big issue with that is the testing requirements for manufacturers to meet this very severe hail is next to impossible. We're including things like plywood and OSB as cover boards, which I do not recommend anyone do. There's modified bitumen guys can meet it a little easier with a gypsum board, but if you're looking at a single ply roof assembly, right now you're looking at putting some sort of wood in your assembly. And just to kind of put it out there, within RoofNav, which is FM Global's database of test roof assemblies, in total, I think there's over 960,000 tested roof assemblies. Less than 5,000 of those meet very severe hail. So, and just a year and a half ago, we were still in the hundreds. So it's starting to get better. If you're in that region and you're FM Global insured or you're Global Risk Management insured who follows FM Global, or sometimes some clients just like to follow FM Global as a rule of thumb, you're looking at possibly some higher cost because it's really difficult to install plywood or OSB as a cover board. And it's just kind of a pain right now. There's really nothing else to do it besides that, but that's just where we're at.
So you mentioned that you're not a fan of having plywood and OSB in a roof system. Can you elaborate a little bit what the concerns are with that in the system?
My concern specifically with plywood is if you go take a piece of plywood and spray a little bit of water on it and put it out in the sun and just watch what it does, it's going to warp. It's going to warp, I mean, immensely. And then OSB kind of doesn't do the warping as much, but it just kind of turns to mush, which that's kind of what gypsum does, but you're losing it. If it gets wet at all, you get a puncture. I mean, you're losing adhesion like that. So,
yeah, let alone the workability, Andrew. Think about how when you detail pipes or when you detail a curb, or when you've got those funky details, you can't conform a piece of plywood or a firm board as readily as you can.
With gypsum or with fiberboard or with whatever you use, you can you just take a utility knife and score that and punch it out and put it around your pipe. I mean, with OSB or plywood, you're sitting that down, you're chalking it out, then you got to take a jigsaw and cut that. I mean, it's just, It's not
labor
realistic.
intensive, it's expensive. Yeah, there's just, it's tough.
So, Andrew, what is the most, and by the way, I apologize, it looked like Jennifer had a few little internet issues. She is back, so we'll get a few more questions back to her. But for now, Andrew, what's the most cost-effective roof system for use in Illinois?
It's kind of a little bit of a loaded one, like Jennifer alluded to. Definitely, there isn't just one magic bullet for a roof system. It depends on where you're at. Like Ben said, if you're in Chicago, you're in urban Chicago, you're having to use a reflective roof. Doesn't necessarily mean a white single ply. I think a lot of people think that. It could be a modified roof. They meet reflective issue or requirements as well. But as you get like, you're up in Chicago where it gets cold quite often, but I mean, Illinois is a pretty big state. You move South Illinois, you're all of a sudden in heating range a lot more than you are cooling range. So there's no great answer there. I mean, I do a lot of work in Illinois and I do a lot of EPDM there. But I don't do a lot of work in Chicago. So
Yeah.
And that goes back to like what Mike was saying earlier, and Jennifer, you got to think about where your site is and what the roof section is. There's not a one size fits all.
Absolutely.
So Jennifer, this person is experiencing significant ice buildup inside their freezers. Without having been to their site, what does your crystal ball say is likely the issue with their roof?
All right. Well, sorry for the technical issues a minute ago. I don't know what happened to my internet for a minute, but I would say that we should look at if there's been any recent changes in the freezer. Have they recently changed the temperature to allow more product to come through, freeze quicker, and move out of that freezer? That temperature change might increase the requirement for insulation and create a place where the temperature or the thermal gradient is too great and we're getting some air infiltration causing some ice buildup on the ceiling. If the ice buildup is in a specific corner, maybe we've got a corner breach and we've got maybe a roof leak or some place where water is able to come through or warm air is able to come through. Any place where you've got that heat transfer is going to cause ice accumulation within the freezer. If it's been ongoing since you installed the freezer, that's a different story. But I would look at, has there been any changes recently? Maybe you put a new roof on and the new roof insulation has created a different climate in the interstitial space above the freezer that you need to take a look at that and take a look at the insulation properties, run a dew point analysis and figure out where is that temperature change and where is that dew point happening to cause the condensation.
Yeah, I'll put on, especially if there has been a roof replacement, there could have been temporary air seals in place prior to that replacement. And when they tore a roof off, you possibly could have ripped air seals out that weren't noticed during the design phase, or they didn't install air seals going back. So air infiltration on freezers is, it's not great.
Yeah, and it's usually the cause of ice buildup, usually.
Yeah.
So Andrew, this person has a building that has 2 roof systems on it right now. Do they really have to tear down to the deck, or are there any other options of what they can do to re-roof that area?
Short answer is yes. Building code requires if you have 2 separate roof membranes in place that you need to tear it off to the deck. And there's good reason for that. I 100% agree with it. It's so you can get a look at that deck. I mean, if you have 2 roof systems in place, you could easily have gone 40 years without looking at that structural component of your building. So short answer is yes. You could coat. That's not technically a roof membrane. So you could technically coat and coat and coat all you want, but eventually that underlying substrate is going to break down, and a coating is no better than what you're putting it onto. So once that underlying roof membrane really starts to go, it's time to bite the bullet and replace it.
Perfect. And so another question for you, Andrew, is when you're out on a project, what do you most commonly see as the deficiencies of sheet metal during the installation phase?
The big one that I notice is, especially if it's one of our specs, we require that the sheet metal and the substrates that the sheet metal butts to be cleaned, primed before they get sealant installed, and that makes a huge difference on how long that sealant lasts. Because if you put a sheet metal counter flashing against a brick wall and just put sealant on it, my best guess is 5 to 7 years. You come back, that sealant's going to be pulled away from that brick wall. You're going to be able to have water going behind it. If you take the time, watch, make sure that your contractor is doing that cleaning and priming, it makes a huge difference.
It does. I think generally speaking, Andrew, sealants and metal are probably the bigger deficiencies that we see. Where you're relying on the sealant to do your waterproofing. Sealants are not long-term. They're a short-term material designed for short-term use.
They're a maintenance item.
Yeah.
Sealants are a maintenance item. So,
and there's also some skill to installing sealants properly tooled with the concave shape or a convex shape. There's some care that has to be taken in order for that sealant to perform the way it was intended. And a lot of times what we see is a sealant that was just looped in and wasn't properly tooled. It won't have the elongation and the properties that it was intended to do if it's just been laid in there and not tooled off.
Sure.
Right. I think also, Ben, we see attachment issues quite frequently. And I just most recently for me on new construction projects that aren't specifying the fastening requirements based on the substrate nor the type of metal component that's being installed. So I think it's critical that that element be addressed. There's regulating bodies out there, ANSI, SPRI, and ES1 that help with that information. However, that doesn't tell the contractor who's installing it that day what that fastener spacing is he using the correct fastener? A lot of variables in that attachment.
Very good. And so, Jennifer, during a project, what can an owner do or a contractor do to help mitigate the odor associated with the adhesives?
Well, I would say actually setting the stage early on, having the contractor make their submittals with the SDS sheets, identifying what components you're going to have up there that they intend to use that have an odor, that have an exposure that you should be aware of. That's step one. So identifying what it is that's going to create the odor, then you can then develop a plan for what you're going to do to mitigate. There's going to be very little way to avoid odors on any solvent or adhesive, even if it's a water-based, because low VOC has an odor as well. And I think, in fact, sometimes the low VOC is worse than the solvent-based and stays around longer. It like hangs in the air longer than the flashes off a little faster. So all we can do is mitigate. There's many strategies. You could cover the ducts. You could reroute the air intake. You could work off hours to try to limit the exposure to those interior occupants to that odor. So there's lots of different strategies to deal with it, but addressing it up front, having a plan of action, knowing what you're going to come into contact with and what your exposure is, and then what can you do to avoid that downtime for that client.
One of the audience members actually just chimed in, and he manages a facility, and he says that partnership with the facility management team to control outside intake on the HVAC can really help as well. And so really having a strong team between the consultant, contractor, and owner, it's just another example of why that is so important.
Yeah, and sometimes they can create positive pressure zones that actually will force the air out. So working closely with the facility management and the HVAC team, yeah, that can actually change the game completely.
Absolutely.
And make it much more palatable.
Communication, folks, it always benefits to talk. Get your group together and talk about it. Excellent point by the audience person. That's great.
So, Mike, this question I'm going to throw to you. And so this person's asking, how can they justify adding a consultant to his budget when his budget was just cut due to COVID? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, if you're going to move forward with the project, we understand the economic environment, but let's say that roof project has to move forward. The risk is too great to defer. You've got safety issues, whatever it is. So that roof project has to move forward. Part of the challenge in the roofing industry these days, guys, I'd alluded to it earlier, is labor. And you got a guy that's building your roof. You got a team of people that are building your roof every single day. The minute you're not watching them is when issues occur. So, you know, you add maybe 4, 5, 6% on the cost of the project to have some, the roofing project to have some on-site quality control, that more than pays for itself to make sure that that roof system gets its design life, meets its design life. You know, you do life cycle costing on that. You add in the cost of construction management, and the life cycle cost models prove that it pays for itself by getting that service life extension. I can't stress enough the industry that we're in right now and where the labor pool is going and the inequality of work that we're seeing in our industry. It's challenging, folks. So even when your economics are such that, okay, I got to do this project, we're not going to defer it. You've got to find some resource to be able to have on-site management. It's one of the most critical components of roof replacement.
We have, I have one more question in the list right now. If you do have any other questions you'd like to ask, please get those sent in right away. And so this last one we're going to give to Jennifer. They have a 20-year warranty on a new roof. What do they need to do as a roof owner now that the roof is installed?
Okay. So you would think that, you know, you got a brand new roof, you can just be hands off for the next 20 years. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to worry about it. But that's really not the case. A lot of times you're going to get a warranty from a manufacturer that's going to have specific requirements for care and maintenance. Some of them have an annual inspection requirement. Some of them have a really awful paperwork process that you have to submit. Documentation of certain repairs or certain evidence of certain repairs once a year, once every 2 years. Some of them require documentation after a major event. So after a wind event, they require you to submit something to them, even though you may not have any damage, they want you to submit something to them. So it's important to read that warranty, read that fine print, and figure out what is my requirement to maintain that warranty. But beyond the warranty, even just looking at it in terms of, I have a brand new 20-year roof. What do I need to do? Take care of your roof. Walk your roof once a year. Walk your roof after a storm and make sure that HVAC cover hasn't blown off and cartwheeled across the roof, digging in 27 times. It just taking a look at your roof, walking up there, having somebody put eyes on it, take those little care steps to clean the gutters, clean the drains. Maintenance can make that roof last and last longer than the 20 years that you paid for.
Yeah, I think that proactive versus reactive stance, Jennifer, is critical. If you're proactive with your roof, that warranty shouldn't even come into play.
Right.
It's a matter of common sense, but it's also a stance that many don't understand. The manufacturers, you know, that's a boom resource financially for the manufacturers. So
yeah, don't get sold on a roof because they gave you a 30-year warranty.
Yeah,
That's that piece of paper protects the manufacturer more than it protects you. And so it's do the maintenance, like Jennifer said, take care of it. That's the best thing you can do.
Yep.
And 4 hours of, I know everybody's stretched thin. Some of the plants and facilities are losing manpower, so they're cutting back on resources. They have now one guy that's taking care of roofs and mechanical and all of this. We're not asking for days on the roof. What we're asking for is just once a month, once every 6 months, get up there, spend 3 or 4 hours walking around, just looking at what's going on your roof, picking that stuff out of the drain barrel. It doesn't have to be a major commitment, but even that will pay dividends.
Very good. Well, that looks like we are at the end of the questions, and we are 1 minute away from the end. So this is perfect timing. As always, if you guys have any further questions, feel free to reach out to any of us on the panel or anybody at Benchmark. We'd be glad to help you talk through any roofing problems. We're roofing nerds, as Mike mentioned, and we just love talking about roofs. So with that, thank you for joining us. And at the end of this, you should be prompted with a link to a survey. We would appreciate your feedback on how we did today and any other webinars you'd like us to put on. Thank you very much.